There's nobody. Okay. Here we go. We had a couple of technical glitches, but it seems that we are in action. And thank you all for bearing in there for our 2-minute late start. So first of all, welcome. And I'm really, really thrilled that you're here. I'm really privileged that I get to do some pretty incredible work around the world. And nothing is, I think, more valuable than the work that we do with our clients in the area of WildFit. And so I want to share a bunch of stuff with you guys today. Strategies for really doing something powerful with your own health in the year ahead. Before we talk a little bit about the psychology of health, because frankly, we're in a bit of a funny place in our cultures around the world, around the way we look at health and around the way we look at people who pay attention to their health and that sort of stuff. And that culture is changing. I remember, for example, 20 some odd years ago, I gave up certain types of food. And when I mentioned to my friends or relatives or just people, oh, I don't eat those things, they're like, oh my God, what are you going to do? And of course, now 20 years later, many people, when I say, oh, I don't eat those foods, they go, oh wow, I wish I didn't. And so the health movement is well underway, but there's some really serious things that affect it and that affect us. And so what I wanted to kind of deal with today or discuss a little bit to start with is the concept of everything in moderation, or I just listen to my body. People say these things quite often. And so what I want to be really clear about is I am not talking about becoming a complete fanatic and being difficult socially and all that kind of stuff. I'm just talking about taking some personal responsibility for your own health. And I know many of you that are on this call, I recognize some of the names and stuff. I know that many of you already take good care of your health and you're maybe looking for some refinements, and others of you are like, wow, where do I even begin? And so I want to start with the concept of everything in moderation. And the reason I want to start with that is that at least in Canada, England, America, you hear quite often this concept of everything in moderation. I'm sure all the different countries around the world have their own version of it. But here's where it leads. The idea of everything in moderation leads to a time when the #1 cause of death on the planet is heart disease. And the #2 cause of death on the planet is cancer. And way up there in the top 10 is medical error treating many of these different issues. In other words, a huge amount of the death that we experience on Earth these days is lifestyle oriented, that it's affected by the decisions that people make from an early age right up until the end. Now, that in itself is not really the problem. Look, we're all going to die. I'd rather not. I'm kind of enjoying my experience here, and I don't want to be a downer. I'm just saying at the end of the day, apparently life has a finite period of time. I'm not so worried about extending that period of time, all that kind of stuff. I mean, yes, I think that can be done for many people. My bigger concern right now is what is the quality of life for most of those people in the last 10 or 20 years of their life. And for a lot of people, the last 10 or 20 years of their life will involve medical treatments and prescription drugs and surgery and being hooked up to machines and tubes coming out of their body. And it will be painful and expensive. And in some cultures, that means expensive at the societary level. In other words, their government will pay for the expensive healthcare that they have to go through. And in other places, it's privately expensive. In other words, your own insurance has to cover it, or even maybe your own private money. And so when we hear the expression everything in moderation, one of the things I want you to think about is that everything in moderation leads to moderate health, right? I mean, does that make sense? Everything in moderation includes your health. And so my question is, are you interested in moderate health? Are you interested in having a moderate amount of energy? Are you interested in having a moderate memory? Are you interested in waking up in the morning and feeling moderate? Are you interested in having moderate sleep? I hope I'm making my point here, that what I'm looking for is to get, to juice life for everything that it's worth, and to have as much energy as possible, and to be healthy as much as possible, and so on. And so this whole concept of everything in moderation has been one of the most dangerous concepts introduced, because what it says is, oh, well, we should eat things in balance. We should have a balanced diet and all this kind of stuff. And so this leads me to point number 2, and that is that, who is it that's influencing our decisions about what to eat and how much of it to eat and how regularly to eat it and so on? And that is that at the end of the day, the vast majority of that influence is marketing. What I mean is that food manufacturers and food marketing companies are out there spending huge amounts of money marketing and lobbying the government and us to influence our eating decisions in a particular direction. I'll give you such a great example. I think at this stage, most of us know that grains largely are optional, and for many people, just dysfunctional generally. And if you're not with me on that yet, bear with me. But we have the old expression, look, man cannot live on bread alone. It's because we know we can't. There are many things that we could live for a very long time on, but grains are not one of those things. And what's fascinating though is that in a marketing sense, Mr. Kellogg, many of you will be familiar with Kellogg's, very famous for making breakfast cereals, did a brilliant, brilliant thing in marketing terms. And that was, at a time when school boards and schools were suffering for budgetary problems and had bare walls and didn't have cool posters and fun stuff because the economy was the way it was, Kellogg decided to do something fascinating. And he sent these beautiful color worksheets and posters and things out to the various schools that had the 4 food groups on them. That's where the 4 food groups originally came from. For those of you who are not familiar with the 4 food groups, because it was largely a North American thing, basically it was this concept that there were 4 fundamental food groups. I think it was like, it was meat, and then there was eggs and dairy, fruits and vegetables, and grains. These were the 4 food groups. And so he sent these posters out to schools, and they were like so dying for material to color up their classrooms and so on, that they started hanging them up and putting them around. And so in essence, Kellogg ended up creating the 4 food groups, and as a result, making people think that it was important that they had a balanced diet, which would include a reasonable quantity of grains. They had to have their bread and their cereals in order to be healthy, which obviously today we know that that's simply not true. So here's the ultimate message I have for you, is that if you have ever felt confused, if you've ever felt, hey, I'm not even sure. One minute this is healthy, and the next minute it's not healthy. One minute red wine's a good idea, the next minute red wine's a bad idea, and all this sort of thing. If you've ever felt confused, what I want you to get is that we are confused on purpose. Not us, but what I mean is that in a marketing sense, it really powers, it's profitable to have us confused, because once we're confused, then what we'll do is we'll just listen to our base instincts. And our base instincts were created at a time very different than the time we live in today. Let's get really specific. For the vast majority of human history, starvation has been the biggest cause of death of humans. It's just the way it was. Nature's pretty unforgiving, right? And so as a result, many of our instincts are specifically derived in order to make sure we don't starve to death. In other words, it's very unusual historically for humans to walk past food and not eat it. Oh, look, there's food. I better eat it because who knows if there will be food tomorrow. And so we have this software in us that's saying constantly making sure that we eat more food than we actually need in any one given day. And on top of that, we crave things based on their level of importance to us and their level of rarity in nature. In other words, if you take something like fruit, or let's just say sweet things, fruit's healthy. It's definitely, there's tons of vitamin C and all kinds of great things in many fruits and natural healthy sugars and so on. But let's get clear about how often nature would have afforded us the ability to have fruit. Not often. And so when it was available, we had a powerful craving to go get as much of it as possible. Well, the problem is sweet things are available all the time now, but yet we still have the shopping list, the instinct, the old message from our ancestors that says, wow, if fruit's in season, eat all of it, right? So we're in a place right now where there's a lot of confusion, and I'll kind of prove it to you. If I were to ask you guys right now, hey, what are some foods that we should eat more of? What we would get from the group is we should eat more fruits and vegetables. We should eat more high quality proteins. Maybe we should eat more nuts. Maybe we should drink more water. People kind of know all this. We should have more greens for sure. People know all this. Then you say, well, what should we eat less of? And they go, well, less refined sugar and less processed foods and less high-fat meats and on and on. So people kind of know what not to eat. And yet, for some reason, the vast majority of people continue to eat not enough of what they need and too much of what they don't. And as a consequence of that, we are dealing with, here's another great example. Type 2 diabetes, as an example. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes. Why? Well, because it's something that became prevalent in adulthood. It didn't happen to children. Only now it's called type 2 diabetes because, well, frankly, it's happening all the time to children. Like, I think something like 25 or 30 years ago, there was an insignificant number of teens and children were getting type 2 diabetes. It was a statistical anomaly for that to ever happen. Whereas today, there's something like 20 to 25 million teenagers in America that either have type 2 diabetes or are on the edge of it. It's happening unbelievably quickly because everything in moderation and because so much of our education about food is coming to us from food marketing companies. The dairy management company in the United States spends something like $200 million a year to influence educators and politicians to increase the demand. This is not their marketing budget, this is lobbying budget. Just the money for influencing senators and congressmen and high school principals. So I hope you get that what I'm really here talking about is it's time for us to start making our own decisions. And the food revolution is well underway. Here's how I joined. I joined because I was sick. I mean, like constantly and regularly sick. Hang on one second. So I joined because I joined the food revolution because, as I said, I was sick. I was dealing with, really significant allergies on a regular basis. I had sinus infections so terrible that they changed the shape of my face. I had cystic acne and I had throat infections so very, like throat infections so severe that I couldn't swallow water sometimes. Stomach cramps that made it impossible for me to operate as long as the cramps were happening. This was just my life. I was always congested. For close to 10 years, I couldn't breathe through my own sinuses. I just couldn't, not without some nasal spray, which would open them for a day, and then I'd wake up in the morning all congested again. And so it was from this position of not being very well that I had a tremendous awakening, and that happened very much like this. I walked into yet another doctor's office, and yet another doctor told me, hey, you know what? We know the solution. And you got to go see the specialist. The specialist needs to look at your throat. It looks like you have chronic tonsillitis, and that's the cause of everything. And if we just take your tonsils out, then you will be okay. And you know something? About 4 days ago, one of my friends on Facebook posted that he was going in for an adult tonsillectomy. First of all, a tonsillectomy is never a minor issue. They say that with children it's a pretty minor deal because the tonsils aren't like fully integrated into the throat and they're pretty little and so on. And as you get older, it becomes a much bigger thing. And he posted on Facebook, how I'm going in to do my tonsillectomy. And I wrote to him immediately and said, oh my God, I wish I knew this a month ago, because I'm telling you, you don't have to have a tonsillectomy. Your tonsils serve a purpose. Their swelling and pain is a symptom. It's not a cause. And unfortunately, his surgery was the next day. And he wrote to me, he goes, Eric, I really wish we talked earlier. I'm booked in. There's nothing I can do. I'm going in for the surgery. Today he posted on Facebook that he nearly died last night. I'm not kidding you. He posted that he nearly died because he ended up bleeding out through his throat. And he lost, I think he said, 2 liters of blood and tissue and had to be rushed back into the hospital and woke up in the morning relieved to be alive. Surgery is not a light decision, especially over something like this that absolutely isn't necessary. And I was really lucky because what happened to me is a friend of mine got a hold of me about a month before my surgery and said, Eric, please, before you go have the surgery, make these changes. I've looked at the way you're living. I've looked at what you eat, and I'm just asking you to make these changes. And so I did. And I shocked myself to no end. I mean, I shocked myself to no end. And that is because after 2 weeks of making some very basic changes, after only 2 weeks, my entire life started to change. I'm not kidding you. The first thing is that after 2 weeks, I was able to breathe through my sinuses for the first time in 10 years. After 2 weeks, my acne started to clear up, and it was phenomenal. And over the space of that month, I lost something like 35 pounds or say 15 kilograms, and all of my symptoms went away. They went away so much that I'd even almost kind of forgotten I had them. About a month later, a friend of mine made me some dessert with some of the foods that I'd previously given up, and I thought, oh, you know what, I'll go ahead and have some of that dessert. I mean, hell, I've been good for a month, why not? And as soon as I had that dessert, within 20 minutes, I was back to having those stomach cramps. I'd forgotten about them. And so I sat down and I thought to myself, this is fascinating. How is it that I could spend 10 years visiting doctors, taking pills and getting injections and doing all these things? How is it that I could spend 10 years doing that and getting no results, and yet 30 days of dietary change and my entire life was different? Frankly, if I lived in a more litigious culture, I think I probably would have sued every doctor I'd seen for malpractice. Today, I view things very differently. I realize nobody becomes a doctor without a genuine desire to heal. What the challenge they have is that they're in a system that is built around disease and not around health. You know, in a 10-year medical education, a doctor might spend something like 4 hours on nutrition. Can you imagine that? In 10 years of medical school, 4 hours on nutrition. What influences your health more than what you're putting into your body? And yet that's really where the state of the industry is. And so I found myself really, really curious at that point how it was that I'd made these changes so easily and so big in my life, like such an incredible transformation, and yet these doctors really weren't getting me there. And so this started me on a really big quest, and that quest involved two things. The one was, what really should we be eating? How really should we be living? And the other one was, why is it that even when people know that, they don't do it? And over the last, I guess almost 20 years, I've undertaken a Indiana Jones-like adventure around the world, reading books. I went to study archaeology at the University of Bristol for a while. I went to go live with Bushmen in Africa to really take a real hard look at what life was like before agriculture and before processed food and GMO and all this stuff. And I arrived at a place where we have some really, really solid answers about the human diet. Let me tell you something right now, fascinating. I love words. The word diet, think about that. What does the word diet mean, right? What does it mean? Does it mean temporary alteration to your eating pattern in order to fit into that outfit for some special event? No, that is not what diet means. We have kind of altered the meaning of the word diet so that we can use it in that sense. But the word diet literally means way of life. Every species on Earth has a diet. The elephant has a diet, the leafcutter ant has a diet, the cheetah has a diet, and Homo sapiens has a diet. And a diet that evolved over millions of years, and a diet that included creating in us certain dependencies on certain vitamins and minerals that we need to get, and certain proteins that we need to get, and certain hydration that we need to get. And it also evolved in us as resistance to certain things that are not healthy for us, that we really shouldn't be having. And so once we can take a look and say, hey, you know what, there is a diet, there is a human diet, then let's take a look and say, how do we figure out what it was? Because we veered really far away from it. And so a big part of the work that we've done in WildFit is to really research history and say, hey, it's almost, I guess the field you would almost call it now is nutritional anthropology. Let's take a look at the history of food and the history of evolution as far as humans go. And the reason we want to do this is that whenever it's been done for captive animals, it works. Elephants used to live 6, 7, 8 years when they were first put in a zoo or a circus. Nobody thought that was a problem. They didn't know how long elephants were supposed to live back then. As soon as they found out that elephants could live 70 years when they're in nature, they started thinking, whoa, we could get 10 times the profit out of every elephant. What do we need to do to get the elephants to live 70 years? You know what we need to do? We need to put them on the elephant diet. That's what they figured out. If they put them on the captive diet, then they're sick and they die young. If they put them on the elephant diet, then they live an elephant lifespan. I know it sounds like unbelievable common sense today, but back then it was a really novel concept. And again, now it's a novel concept for us, for humans, because there is a human diet. And we need to, as best possible, adhere to it. And at the minimum, we need to get enough of the food that are required. Here's a question I have for you. What do you think, 2016, just around the corner, right? What do you think will have a bigger impact on your health in 2016? Eating enough of what you need or avoiding the bad stuff? Think about it. What do you think? Because the most common answer, I've obviously, I've done versions of this talk for thousands of people around the world, and I've asked audiences this very same question, and generally it works like this. Most people believe that it's more important to eliminate the bad stuff. And so what I want to tell you right now is there's where most things are broken right away, where most dietary programs are broken immediately. Getting rid of the bad stuff is not nearly as important as getting enough of the good stuff. I'll give you an example. Let's say we take a human and we feed them exactly what humans have evolved to eat. We give them exactly the right amount of fruits and vegetables and high quality proteins and hydration and all the stuff they need to have, all right? We give them everything they need to have. And what we then do is say, all right, you can have everything you need, but we're taking all the vitamin C out. That's it. You can have everything you're supposed to be having, but we're going to take out the... So there's no Mars bars, there's no Coca-Cola, there's no GMO, there's none of that stuff. It's all perfect human food, but we're taking out the vitamin C. What do you think would happen? They would get sick. They would get skin eruptions, scurvy, and eventually they would die because you have nutritional requirements. Here's the real interesting thing. For the vast majority of human history, as I said before, the #1 cause of death among humans has been starvation. And the real joke today is that that's still true. And what I mean is that when you take a look at the majority of death on the planet today, the majority of premature death on the planet today, it takes place because people are overeating and undernourished. So they're dying from malnutrition even though they're fat, even though they're overweight, even though they're eating a lot of food, because they're still ultimately starving because they're not getting enough of what they need. And so the first thing that we really need to do is pay attention and say, okay, how do I get enough of what I need? And this is really simple. The thing you need the most of, and I know many people come to me and go, Eric, I don't know if I can do this. I was a vegetarian for a long time, and I don't want to have to eat meat. Do I have to eat meat when I'm on WildFit? Or other people come to me and go, Eric, you're not going to make me give up eating meat when I'm on WildFit. So let's just talk about grammar for a moment before we talk about meat or wheat or carbs or any of that kind of stuff. One of the peculiar things about the English language, and I assume that it's probably fairly true of other languages too, is that we take one word and we have that word mean a whole lot of things. So for example, we take one word and we call it meat. So what does meat mean? Well, it means, I guess, flesh from an animal, right? But is all meat the same? Is it? I mean, isn't it true that you could have, for example, 2 cows and one was grown in a feedlot with all kinds of hormones and antibiotics and chemicals and weird stuff, and the other one was brought up organically? Are those both meat? They are. But are they both the same in terms of their health or negativity? I don't think so. Oh, wait a minute, let's add a third meat. What about something like a buffalo or an antelope or a deer or a moose? Is that the same as the cow, which is the same as the feedlot cow? No. Meat, however, still encompasses all 3 of these groups. So when somebody says, oh, well, meat's good for you or meat's bad for you, you just can't do that. The answer is meat good or bad for you? You go, yes, both. There are some meats that are unbelievably bad for you, and there's some that are very, very good for you. And so we need to look at diet in a very different way. So let's do it like this. Humans, in some form, starting, say, with Australopithecine, go back, let's say, 5-6 million years. Let's call it 6 million years. And if we were to take our 6 million year history, here it is, the full width of the screen, 6 million years. I get my arms out to the edges. All right, 6 million year history. And then we correlate that 6 million year history to a 60-year-old human, okay? Just so, because it's hard to think in millions of years, right? So we correlate it to a 60-year-old human. Good. So now my question is, how old was our human when our humans started eating, let's say, grains, like wheat and stuff like that? How old do you think? You know, like in its 60th year, 59 plus. How old was that human when they started having dairy products like milk or cheeses? Like we're talking, you know, maybe 2 weeks before their 60th birthday. When did they start having refined sugar? About 30 seconds ago. When did they start having GMO? Less than a second ago. In other words, the impact of these things is immeasurable to us. We're in a place where all of these changes that we've made have happened really, really recently, and suddenly our 60-year-old person has major heartburn, or more to the point, dying of heart attacks and cancer and all this kind of stuff. So what we want to do is look at all of that time prior to this new age, the Neolithic, if you want to call it that, prior to agriculture, prior to all the grains and dairy and processed foods and all that stuff that came more recently. We want to look prior to that. I'm not saying we can't have those things. I'm not saying we have to give them up forever. What I'm saying is that to get ourselves to optimal health, we have to first make sure that we're eating enough of the original foods. enough of the original nutritional requirements that we're supposed to be getting. And so what I'm kind of curious about here is, what do you think those foods were? And again, we already know the answers. Please, guys, in 2016, do this. Eat far, far more fruits and vegetables than you're eating currently today. And I don't just mean the quantity. Yes, upstage the quantity, but also the variety. You know, these days, when I go out and I have an audience of, say, 1,000 people in the audience, I'll say to them, all right, so let me ask you a question. How many people in this room eat at least 10 species of plants every year? And you'll get probably 80 or 90% of the people raise their hands. And I go, how many are 20? Boom, half of their hands go down. How many are 25 or 30? Now there's like less than 5% of the room. How many are 30 plus? Maybe 1 or 2 health fanatics in the room, and the rest of the people are not. Let me put this in perspective for you, that historically speaking, human beings were eating 200 plant species a year. 200. There are vitamins and minerals that we haven't even assigned names and letters to, that we don't even know that we're not getting, because we have got ourselves to a point where we have shunned so many of the fruits and vegetables that have been traditionally part of what we're eating. Go to the grocery store and look at that section and stop worrying so much about what you're familiar with, and worry about, how could I get substantially more vegetables into my body, particularly greens. That's going to be where you get your single biggest kick. The healthiest things you're going to get are going to be the kales and green lettuces, all those kind of things. So that's the first thing. Also, fruit. Eat fruit, but recognize that fruit was a very season. Wasn't something that you know all the time. It was something that would be there for a week or two, and then it'd be gone. And so what I want to suggest, a little bit of fruit, not such a good idea, but eating a lot of fruit once a week or once a month or something like that might be a lot more supportive of the results you want to get. And make sure you're getting some really good high quality proteins. And for some of you, you know, that meat will be, well, a piece of beef is 40% fat. A piece of buffalo or moose is 4% fat. Oh, but Eric, where would I get such things? Let me tell you right now, unless you live in an incredibly obscure location, you can almost always go to a butcher around the world and say, hey, venison, I would like some deer or moose or something like that. They know where to get it. They just aren't asking for it all the time. And so you know, increasing your intake of high quality proteins in that way. You know, seafood could be a good example, shellfish and this sort of stuff. And if you, and of course water. Water should be a big part of what you're having. And if you focus on getting enough of all of those things, you're well on the way. And you might even begin to find that your craving for some of the less functional things go down. They go down. And the reason for that is really simple, is that if you're given a choice, you know, let's say, let me just say this before we go on. I know we've had some technical issues with the webinar. I've been trying to continue on while the team's been working through the technical issues. What I would love is if some of you are, just make sure that you're actually on the broadcast and you're seeing it, pop a note in the chat area just so I can see that you're on. And equally, the questions that you might pop in there generally show up about 60 seconds late from me because there's a delay in the broadcast. So I am definitely going to want to answer some questions from you guys, and now would be a good time for you to start popping them in while I'm still speaking. So please confirm that you're actually seeing the broadcast. My screen says you are, but I've just heard from somebody on the team that some of you reported you're not. So let me know if you're seeing the broadcast. And if you are seeing the broadcast, this is a good time to put questions into the window so that I can address them for you live. In fact, I think we even have the capacity to bring some of you into the Hangout, which, you know, we'll see what we can do. So now, what I was getting at here is that for 2016, if you do just some very fundamental things, you increase your vegetable intake, and both quantity and variety. You increase your fruit intake, but recognizing seasonality and some rational thinking there. And you increase your high quality protein intake. If you just do those, and your water, if you just do those 4 fundamental things, you can have a substantially better quality of life all the way through 2016. And you might notice that many of your normal cravings begin to fade away. Like one of the things I was saying before is that, you know, very often when somebody's sitting hungry, right, they're looking at 2 food choices. One's the not so healthy choice and the other one's the healthy choice. Well, you know, what's really odd about us is that we will often take the not healthy choice. Why? because the not healthy choice is often packed with calories. And our instincts say, get as many calories as possible. It's sweet or whatever the case may be. So then we take the unhealthy food, but once we've had the unhealthy food, we're a lot less likely to eat the healthy food. And so we end up overfed and undernourished. Whereas if we make our highest priority to take care of the healthy foods first, and then we can take a look at the unhealthy foods because we feel like having a treat or what have you, it changes things dramatically. I hope this makes sense to you. And so let's do this. I want to offer you guys kind of an opportunity here, because clearly when you're part of a community, it makes it a whole lot easier to move forward and get some real results here. And so I have a couple of different ways that I can support you through this, but I want to talk a little bit about the results that we've really seen with people, and they've just made the basic changes that I'm talking about. Obviously with a little bit of coaching and support, because it's a tough battle to do on your own sometimes. Some of the results that we've seen have been like way past even what I believed when we created this program. I mean, I'd seen the results in myself and some of my friends when I'd helped them, but when we formalized 3 years ago, when we formalized the WildFit program and created the WildFit Challenge, we have been repeatedly shocked. It is a very common occurrence at this point for us to get emails from clients. Hang on a second. We very repeatedly get comments from clients about, for example, going off their blood pressure medication. So at some point in time, they visited the doctor said, hey, you need to have some blood pressure medication. They get prescribed it. Now let me ask you something. When does somebody stop taking blood pressure medication? They don't. I mean, once you've got a blood pressure problem, if you don't change your lifestyle, you're going to keep having a blood pressure problem. You're going to keep taking the pills until you die. And what we've had repeatedly is clients writing to us saying, wow, I just went and had new blood work done and my doctor took me off my blood pressure meds. That's a common occurrence for us. We've had a number of people come to us with type 2 or pre-diabetic conditions coming out and being what we now refer to as post-diabetic. A post-diabetic is somebody who was once pre-diabetic or was once diabetic and was therefore looking at having to use medication to regulate their blood sugar. And now they're post-diabetic. In other words, they're maintaining their blood sugar through dietary control, through lifestyle change, and they're back to being functional and healthy. The health benefits of that, by the way, are immeasurable. If somebody enters into a space of diabetes in their 30s, for example, the odds of them losing their eyesight or a limb by the time they're in their 60s are extremely high and expensive and painful and difficult for themselves and for the people around them. And so, and just about 2 weeks ago, I got a phenomenal email from one of our coaches in Sweden that said that they'd had a client that had been dealing for 40 years with really serious intestinal issues relative to a Crohn's infection, Crohn's disease. And after 40 years of living this way and taking, like, I'm not kidding you, 8 Imodium pills a day, this person, after the 9th week on doing our WildFit Challenge, returned to regular digestion, like functional digestion and health for the first time in 40 years. I am not standing here or sitting here, as the case may be, promising to cure your ills and cure diseases and what have you. What I'm saying is that whatever treatments you opt for in life to create the maximum health, your body, the healthier your body is, the more functional it's going to be in healing, the better able it's going to be to heal. And in many cases, it'll self-heal. We already know there are many, many lifestyle diseases that can be self-healed by changing your lifestyle, by moving regularly, by eating functional foods, by getting enough of the foods you need, and by looking at your psychology. Because this brings up the next point, and that is why don't people do it properly? Why do they give in? Why do they eat that thing just this once? Why do they make just this one exception? Why is today a special day and tomorrow's another special day? Why is it that people are constantly making exceptions? And understanding that psychology is a huge part of the way we administer the WildFit Challenge. Because what happens with our clients is we don't come along and say, stop this, stop this, stop this. What we do is we help our clients get to a place where they no longer want those things. And that's a really big shift if you think about it. Like, the reason, I read once that the average person will gain 3 pounds for every diet they go on, or 1.5 kilograms, let's say. But every diet they go on, they'll gain 1.5 kilograms, 3 pounds. Every time they go on a diet, they gain weight. And that's despite the fact that many times they will actually lose weight when they go on the diet initially. You know what's really fascinating about this? It's really simple why. Because what happens is that people very often lose weight by malnourishment. They cut down their calories, they eat less, or they eat prepared packages from whatever fat loss company that they're buying their food from. And so as a result, they're malnourished. And then when the diet comes to an end, they go back to their regular eating pattern. And guess what? They resume gaining weight. They gain back the weight they lost, and then they continue to gain weight at the rate that everybody else gains weight, because the average person gains 3 pounds a year, whether they go on a diet or not. It's just the way it is. And so one of the things that we found really fascinating is that the vast majority, I mean, I should say, to my knowledge, every single one of our clients, save one. There's one that I'm still working on. But every single one of our clients, save one, has maintained whatever weight loss or health turnarounds that they've created on the challenge and continue to improve them in most cases. In fact, I'll give you a great example. One of our clients, he's so far the client who lost the most weight. And by the way, this is not all about weight loss. It's just, since that's such an obvious measure of health, it comes up quite a lot. And one client came, and right now I think he holds the record for the most weight lost during the 90-day WildFit challenge. I think he actually lost about 40 kilograms or about 90 pounds in the 90 days. Phenomenal amount of weight loss. He had a lot to lose. Now, about a year later, he says to me, well, you know, Eric, I feel like a failure. I said, what? And he goes, well, I've kind of slipped off the program a little, you know, I'm eating a lot more fruit than I probably should be and some other things. And I said, really? You feel like a failure? And he says, yes. And I said, but hang on a second, did you put the weight back on from the WildFit challenge? He goes, oh, no, I didn't put the weight back on. I just didn't keep losing. So I said, so you're net down 90 pounds for the first time in your life, and you didn't put it back on for the first time in your life, and you think of yourself as a failure. And he went, I get your point. In other words, he wasn't at all a failure. He achieved really incredible results, and here's why. Because his definition of cheating fundamentally changed. Where cheating in the past might have been to eat a whole pizza to himself and a liter of Coke, cheating became, wow, I had a huge fruit smoothie, or I went out and had a dairy-free ice cream. You know, his cheating changed, and as a consequence, his health was changed dramatically. And why his cheating changed is that we changed his actual wants, just like we can do for you. We can actually, like, if there's a food that right now you wish you didn't eat, that you wish you didn't eat, or you wish you didn't eat so often, well, what that means is that inside you, there's like 2 personalities. There's your health personality, and then there's your sugar monster, let's call it. And one of them, yes. Can they see you? Wow, I'm like, okay, so if you're still watching, I'm now hearing that it's not working. So I have been, I don't know, I'm gonna try and talk to the tech team now and figure this out. So if any of you are watching, I'm sorry for the interruption, but apparently there's a whole lot of people that are not connected for some reason. Okay, I understand from the team that they've created a new webinar link. Webinar Jam has apparently completely botched this whole webinar. It's showing broadcasting to me, it's showing live people in the room, but apparently nobody's actually seeing this. I'm still speaking just in case some of you are. In the chat window, there is a Zoom link. So please click on the Zoom link, and we're gonna try this all again over there. What's that? It's already done. Hello, hello.
Hey, Eric.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Who is that?
It's Alan Ebright. How you doing?
Good, good. Apparently we're having a whole host of technical difficulties. I've just been doing a 30-minute webinar for nobody, apparently, over on Webinar Jam.
Oh, great. Yeah, tech's fun when it works, not so much when it doesn't.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Petra, are you with me? Petra, are you there?
Eric, it's Jackie. I'm here.
Okay, so what's going on? Apparently we've moved everybody over here to Zoom.
We're moving everyone over here. We've been chatting with them the whole time that we've been doing the webinar, trying to get them supported. So we know that they know that there's a new link coming right now. We've already posted it.
Okay, so I'm going to pause for the moment. I'm going to go get a drink, and I'll be back ready. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to bring everybody in, I guess. Is that
perfect?
Right?
Yeah, that works great.
All right. You know what? Let's make it real informal. Get everybody, just tell people flip their cameras on, and we'll just be able to have a chat.
Okay, perfect.
All right, I'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Jackie, how are we? Are we set to go?
Did you hear anything I just said? Because I wasn't sure if I was muted.
No, I didn't hear anything. Are we set to go?
Oh, hey, no, you held a 30-minute webinar. I did this 3-minute catch-up, was all good. So I'm saying that we have 8 participants here right now, so that means there's just a few more, and I'm doing another message to let them know. And so you can go ahead and do welcomes and get started while I do that first.
That sounds good. Thank you.
And Elise might have a message for you I sent via Skype. Cool.
Okay, hi everybody. I am really, really sorry about whatever led to that little fiasco around, we've been using Webinar Jam for a long time, but we haven't for a few months, and we launched this all in Webinar Jam, and on my screen it says, hey, all the participants are logged in, and the webinar is live, but apparently that wasn't the case. So I want to thank you for sticking with it and hanging tight. And I think what we'll do is, hang on. Okay, I think what we're going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit more informal, since now we can actually all be here participating. Please notice that in Zoom, you have the ability to mute or unmute yourself relative to the webinar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, and then we're going to just have some open Q&A, since this can be more like a video conference now than a straight-out webinar. So I think that'll be quite a lot of fun. Remember, though, if you do have a question, you need to unmute yourself so I can hear you. Also, most of you right now, it looks like you've got your cameras switched off. And so what I recommend is, if you want to jump in and ask questions, you go ahead and switch your cameras on. But that's clearly voluntary. There you go. Hello. Cameras are coming on. See, the shyness is over. Alan, good to see you. Good deal. All right, so wow, I guess I have to start right at the beginning again, so I will. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Edmonds, and my background really is as an entrepreneur. I've had a number of different businesses in a variety of industries, ranging from wireless networking to Hollywood special effects to medical simulation for the U.S. Army. I have an eclectic entrepreneurial background. But my true passion, what's really underneath all of it, even now as I travel around the world speaking about business and doing high-level consulting and stuff, my real passion lies in health. And that's because, frankly, there's just no point in being successful in your life and in your relationship and in all those different areas of your life if your health is off. And so I want to address a really important principle before we even get started anywhere, and that is the concept of everything in moderation. Because I am occasionally accused of being a health fanatic. It has happened that people have accused me of being, what do they used to call them? They used to call us food cranks, right? Oh, he's a food crank. And so I just want to address this concept of everything in moderation. I want to address it this way. Everything in moderation must also include health. In other words, everything in moderation means moderate health. It means moderate memory, moderate sleep, moderate energy levels. It means waking up in the morning and feeling moderate. It means having a moderate amount of energy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It means having a moderate sex life and sex drive. I'm kind of kidding around a little bit here, but everything in moderation means a moderate physical frame. And I'm not okay with that. I really believe that we've got this time here on earth, and we're really meant to milk it for everything we've got and have as much fun as possible. And having energy and health is kind of crucial to that. There's very little point in being the most wealthy guy in the cemetery. I don't really see the point in that. And also, there's very little point in being the wealthiest guy in the hospital, because that's how it really is. I mean, you know, a lot of times people say to me, well, Eric, you're not going to live forever. I know. I mean, I'm still working on it, but I know I'm not going to live forever. What I am aware of, though, is that the vast majority of people living in the Western world today are not simply going to die prematurely. They're going to die prematurely and painfully. In other words, they're going to spend the last 20 years of their life hooked up to machines on a variety of drugs, having surgeries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's how it will be for the majority of people. It already is this way. Number one cause of death in the Western world, heart disease. Number two cause of death in the Western world, cancer. And I can't remember exactly where it is on the scale. I think it's number 4 or 5. Medical error. No kidding. In America, they have a special Latin name for it, so you don't know what it means. But medical error. It's one of the highest causes of death in America, and therefore in other Western countries. So when I kind of become a little bit fanatical about health, it's because I really, really believe that, you know, we're here to have fun. We're here to enjoy our lives, and we're here to do big things. And if we don't have the energy to do it, what's really the point? And so let's talk about the food revolution, because it's well underway. I mean, it is really well underway. The prediction I've been making for years is finally starting to come true, and this was the prediction I made, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe 8 years ago, and that was that there will come a time when society will regard the food manufacturing industry as significantly more evil and manipulative than the tobacco industry ever was. And I believe that time is arriving now. I believe that it is happening already. And to put this in perspective, in the 80s, when people started suing all the tobacco companies, they lost every lawsuit. Nobody could win anything against a tobacco company in the 80s. In the 90s, people started winning those lawsuits. And in fact, not maybe 4 months ago, a woman won $20 billion in Florida from a tobacco company. Billion! Now, what happens is the law didn't change. The laws didn't change, but the juries did. The interpretation of the law changed. The culture changed. People began to accept a new reality. And that's exactly what's going to happen with food. There was a time, maybe some of you also partook in this shameful behavior, but there was a time when I was young, you know, if we saw somebody that was overweight, we looked upon them as though it was their fault, that they were gluttonous or greedy, or that they couldn't control their eating. And what I now realize is that it is absolutely not their fault. It is absolutely not somebody's fault when they're overweight, or it is not. It is the food manufacturing and food marketing industry combined with some genetics or even epigenetics that are unfair. And so, you know, we're at a place today where it is our responsibility to take control of our health. And so I need to address why it is that I hold myself out as a spokesman of this cause, because I'm not a doctor. I didn't go to medical school, thankfully. I want to describe for you my journey a little bit so you kind of get where this comes from. And that is that at the age of 21 years old, I was sick, like regularly sick. I had sinus infections so severe that they changed the shape of my face. I had, I had throat infections so severe that my tonsils would bleed and I couldn't swallow water on some days. I had cystic acne. I had stomach cramps that were so debilitating that when they happened, I couldn't even function. This was just my life. I didn't know it could be different. I just I assumed I have brown hair. This person has blonde hair. I have nasal infections. This person doesn't. It just is. And then finally, after 10 years of visiting doctors and getting injections and pills and all this kind of stuff, I finally went to go see a doctor one more time. And the doctor said, Eric, we need to get you to a specialist. And I said, okay, let's go. Why are we waiting this long? Let's go see the specialist. So we go see the specialist. And the specialist takes one look down my throat. I'm not joking. He took one look down my throat, and he looked at me and was pale. He said, oh, my God, we have to take out your tonsils. We got to take them out right now, like as soon as we can get you into surgery. And I'm like, yes, let's do that. Let's do that like right now. They're painful all the time. Let's do that immediately. If they're the cause, I want them out. And so at 21 years old, I agreed to have the surgery, and I was ready for it. Now, I want to tell you that just about a week ago, a friend of mine on Facebook posted that his doctor had recommended to him a tonsillectomy, an adult tonsillectomy, which is a very different surgery than a child tonsillectomy. The tonsils have grown substantially by the time you're an adult. They've integrated into your throat. It's a much more. And so I immediately, as soon as I saw his post on Facebook, I wrote to him privately and said, listen, I really don't think you need to have a tonsillectomy. I want to talk to you about, the dangers of having a surgery. And I don't want to get into the details of that. I'm just saying, hey, you know what? I believe that whatever's going on with your tonsils could be resolved by making some lifestyle changes. He says, Eric, I so appreciate you reaching out to me. My surgery is tomorrow. I'm in so much pain. I'm just going to go ahead and have the surgery. But I'll talk to you about the lifestyle changes after I have the surgery. I said, no problem. I mean, how much can I do? About an hour ago, maybe 3 hours ago now I think about it, he posted on Facebook from the hospital because after getting home, his throat ruptured and he lost 2 liters of blood and tissue out the surgery site from where his tonsils were, and he nearly died. They had to rush him back to the hospital, and they've just revived him, and he's now writing from the hospital alive and grateful that he's alive. I'm just like, I am so grateful because what happened to me was a month before my surgery, a friend of mine came along and said, you know what? I see the way you eat. I see the way you live. And it doesn't have to be that way. You absolutely can change these things for yourself. And so that person recommended to me a couple of lifestyle changes, which I made. I mean, it was only for a month, right? Why not? And I cut out a little bit of this, and I added in a little bit of that, and I cut out some more of this, and so on. And after 2 weeks of these changes, I noticed immediately some changes. Like the first thing was my throat wasn't bothering me. And the second thing was that I woke up one morning and I breathed in through my sinuses for the first time in 10 years, like without some kind of nasal spray or congestion. And you know what's really funny? I remember when I woke up that morning, I woke up and I breathed through my nose and it hurt. It hurt because the tissues in my sinuses were not used to being exposed to air. I mean, it didn't hurt like pain. It hurt like somehow relief, but it was actually painful. And all the acne, the cystic acne that I had in here, I could see, for any of you who have suffered with acne in the past, you'll know there's a difference between new acne and old acne. I could see that I had no new acne. I only had old acne after 2 weeks. And after a month of just some very subtle changes, I had lost 35 pounds, or, for those of you metric, we're talking about, 15 kilograms or so. And I had all my acne was completely gone. The only other time in my life that acne had gone away was when the doctors put me on a pill called Accutane. And you know what's funny about Accutane is that if you read it, it says if you're taking this pill, you must use 2 forms of birth control. It says that right in the little pamphlet. If you're taking these pills, you must use 2 forms of birth control. And if by chance those 2 forms of birth control fail you, and one of you or your partner ends up pregnant, you must abort. Like that's the pill that I'm putting into my body. Well, guess what I was not allowed to have while I was taking this pill? Dairy products. I was not allowed to have any milk or cheese while I was on this pill. And then as soon as the pill was done after a month, my acne was all cleared up, but then I was allowed to go back and have ice cream and cheese, and guess what came back? Acne in a heartbeat. This time it went away for good. And so here's what happened. There was a new me, like a completely new me. In fact, just to give you an idea, here's the real interesting thing. I weigh more now than I did before I lost all the weight. I weigh more now, but of course I wear it differently. I'm active. I wear it as muscle mass rather than the fat that I was wearing before. But the physiological change to my body was so wholesale that when my mother saw me, she didn't recognize me. With only a 35-pound loss or 15-kilo loss. So I flew down to Africa. My mother was living in South Africa at the time. I flew down to Africa, got off the plane, walked down the steps, and there was the greeting area. And I saw my mom, and she looked right at me and threw me. You know, like I could see she was looking at me, but not seeing me. And then she saw that I had my girlfriend with me, and my girlfriend had bright red hair. I'm sorry, my girlfriend, she always told me it was actually strawberry blonde. Strawberry. It was red. It was red. But she had this bright red hair. And so my mom looked and saw her, and as a result did a double take and looked back at me, and then realized it was me. My face structure had changed so much from the change in my life. And so all of this brought on something for me, and that was massive curiosity. How was it that 10 years of visiting doctors could do nothing for me, and 30 days of dietary change could do everything for me? And that really burned me. Like my grandfather was like a world famous orthopedic surgeon. My uncle was a very recognized orthopedic surgeon. I had another uncle that was, it wasn't just these distant medical people. It was medical people around me. I'm like, how is it that didn't help? And I want to be really clear. At the time, I became incensed. Like at the time, if I'd lived in America, a very litigious America, I probably would have been filing malpractice suits, although I'm kidding. But I was really angry. I'm not angry at all anymore. I no longer blame the individual doctors for any of this kind of stuff, because I believe nobody puts that massive commitment into going to medical school, all those years and the expense, if they aren't at their core wanting to heal people. The trouble is that they're in a broken system. They're in a system that makes money on profitability or makes profitability on disease. Medicine today is the study of disease, not the study of health. In fact, this always shocks me. You go to medical school for 10, 12 years, I just want you to think about this before I give you the answer. Really, truly, how much time in 10 years of medical school do you think they should spend on nutrition? Because it's about 4 hours. 4 hours. What the hell? I can't even relate to that. Now, obviously, that will begin to change, and I think it already has begun to change. But that's how it's been up until this last couple of years, and it's still very prevalent. And so this curiosity in me really inspired. It wasn't a passive curiosity; it was a very active curiosity. I wanted to know the answer. I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to figure out what was going on, and I was very blessed with a couple of weird, let's call them, coincidental things. The first thing I found out, or the first thing that I remembered, was that my father's grandfather had discovered the oldest Homo sapiens skull in the history of Earth, the forest-fed skull. It's 259,000 years old. I've gone to visit it in Bloemfontein and also the cast of it in the New York Natural History Museum. And so I became really fascinated with Middle Stone Age history, totally separate to my thoughts about health. I became fascinated with this area of the archaeology and anthropology related to that time in human history. And also, I've been doing wildlife photography since I was about 12 years old, so I was really fascinated by wildlife. And so here I was on my way down to Africa, and I, with all this curiosity burning me, and open up this magazine, and I find this article. And the article is all about elephants in captivity. And it says that when they were first putting elephants in zoos and circuses and stuff, they would very often get sick and die, and they would only usually live 6 or 7 years. But they could make their money back over that 6 or 7 years, so good investment from their perspective. Until it was discovered that elephants could live like 70 years. And as soon as people realized elephants could live 70 years, the zoo owners and the circus owners and the investors, they became extremely concerned about their profits, not their elephants. I wish it was about their elephants, but it was like, hey, if I can get 10 times as much out of each elephant, then I'm going to make a lot more profit. And so they started looking at what the difference was, and it was very fun. It was very simple. The difference was that the elephants in captivity were eating the captive diet, and the elephants in the wild were, according to the article in In-Flight magazine, eating the wild diet, the elephant's wild diet. Now, the grammarian in me hated that. I like words, and I like the specificity of grammar. I'm not any kind of major wordsmith. I like it. And so I'm looking at this going, you know what? It's not the elephant's wild diet at all. That's a grammatical screw-up. It's the elephant's diet. It's not their wild diet. That is the elephant diet. There's the captive diet, and then there's the elephant diet, not the elephant's wild diet. As I was reading this article, I wanted to take out my red pen and circle it and go, no, it's the elephant's diet. And as I'm having this weird, insane notion about correcting the grammar of this article, I suddenly have one of those light bulb moments. It goes off in my head, bing! Holy crap, if elephants have a diet, then so do we. Then every living thing on Earth has a diet. If an elephant has a diet, okay, so what is the elephant's diet? It turns out the elephant's diet is to eat around 200 kilograms of fresh grass and bark every day and to drink about 70 liters of water. Those numbers can go up or down a little, but that's roughly what the elephant's diet is. And the cheetah has a diet. Its diet is to eat roughly 2.5 kilograms of fresh meat. They won't scavenge. They won't eat something that is already dead. They have to kill it themselves. That's their diet. The leafcutter ant has a diet, and oddly, it's not leaves. They go out and collect leaves, and they bring them back to their home, and then they use the leaves to compost, and then they farm aphids. I mean, they have this whole agricultural system. That's their diet. And whenever you take a species and remove it, take it away from its diet, it gets sick. And when you put it back on its diet, it gets healthy. I'm not saying there aren't individuals that still experience injury or sickness from time to time when they're on their diet, but statistically speaking, they're fundamentally healthy. When you take them off their diet, they're not healthy. So now let's take this approach a little further. What do you of all the species on Earth, which is the most sick? Which species suffers the most illness on Earth? Homo sapiens. Aren't we supposed to be the intelligent one? Aren't we supposed to be at the top of the food chain and the super intelligent species? No, we're the sickest species on Earth. Oh, and then wait a minute. What are the next most sick species on Earth? Pets, zoo animals, and laboratory animals, animals that we keep. If we keep them, they're sick. If they're in nature, they're healthy. And so I'm reading this article and I'm going, okay, wait a minute now. We don't have wild elephants to go and, like with the elephants, they could go look at the wild elephants and say, what's the elephant's wild diet? They could do that. Here I am on the plane going, well, we can't do that. There are no longer wild humans that I'm aware of. I mean, we could go and look at most of them are like the Maasai, for example. But the Maasai aren't really living the way humans used to live. They're what we call pastoralists. They have livestock, so they're not. That's not really appropriate. So I'm like, well, maybe we can just look at archaeology. Like we just look at history. And so one of the coolest places I've ever visited was this cave on the southern coast of South Africa. And you can go into this cave, and it's so cool. I grew up in Canada. So if you're in Canada and somebody goes, oh yeah, that guy lives in a really old house. If somebody lives in a really old house in Canada, it's like 90 years old. So then I moved to England. And now if somebody lives in a really old house in England, it's like 300, 400, 500 years old. And then you move on into Europe and you go, somebody lives in a really old castle, it's like 600 years old. And then you move all the way out, like you go out, to Montenegro and around that area. And there are people, oh man, they've been living in this particular castle for 1,000 years. You go down to those caves around, that stretch of land between Cape Town and Durban. People have been living in those caves for 200,000 years. 200,000 years. That means that the old Canadian house is closer in age to the old castle than it is to those caves. And one of the coolest ones that I ever went in, what they did is that they cut down into the cave floor, because you see when people are living in caves, they eat and they throw stuff over their shoulder and they just litter. And so the cave floor is constantly growing like this over the years. And so what they did is they cut down into the cave floor. They cut down deep into the floor. And then they put glass and stairs so you can walk down and you can see what people have been eating for 200,000 years. We do know what the human diet is. We are well aware of what the human diet is. But the food industry does not want you to know that the human diet involves eating probably half of the amount of food that you currently eat. And it doesn't involve eating food coloring and preservatives and excessive saturated fats. It doesn't involve all those things. And the food industry doesn't want you to know that, because that's where they make their profit from. The reality is we now know what the human diet is. And so I got to take this to another whole level, and that was that about 2007, I was leading a leadership program. I have an annual leadership program that I take people up Kilimanjaro. And I had just been leading one of our programs up Kilimanjaro. And our logistics team in Tanzania, the owner of the company came to me and goes, Eric, I just was Googling you, and it seems like you're all into this sort of human history thing and nutritional anthropology, and would you like to go meet some Bushmen? And I was like, excuse me? What exactly do you mean? He goes, well, we've got a tribe of people here called the Hadza, and they live around, they live out in the bush, and they're hunter-gatherers, they do no farming, they don't have money, they live, he said, have you ever seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy? And I said, yes,